had so many chainsaws coming to be worked on with us, um, we had to kind of operate in a triage mode. So the motto became, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. It is very natural for us as tinkerers and repairers to want to see a project through, to get it, see it all the way through, and then fix it and be able to give it back to them. But we were working on a numbers game. And so two or three times we had to remind our repairers that if you've been working on it for an hour or two, it may be time to move on to something else. We also had some systems in place that, because I think of the emotional pull that we were feeling to try to fix everyone's product, we bent our own rules. One of those rules, for example, is at our repair cafes, we never take home items to work on like at home. It's a liability concern. There's logistical concerns like how will you get the item back to that person? That's been in place for years. Immediately after the storm, we bent that rule a little, and in hindsight, we wish we hadn't, because it became a bit of a logistical nightmare later when people were coming up to us and being like, oh, so-and-so has my generator, and it's weeks later, and it's hard for us to get in touch with that repairer. So in hindsight, we had these systems in place, and we wish we would have stuck to our rules a little better, because there's a lot of emotions, and you think you're bending the rules for the greater good, but in the end, it kind of ended up costing us a little. So the demand was overwhelming as far as the tools that we were working on, but also people coming up and wanting to help. So highly recommend within your organization, kind of thinking about who's handling what. For instance, with us, Dan and I were working together. Dan has the repair experience, and I'm good at handling people and doing comms. We were having hundreds of messages a day coming in on our various channels of people wanting to help and not knowing how, people wanting to send us money, people wanting to try to get us supplies. If we didn't have a person channeling all of that energy into something productive, we would have lost some of these opportunities. We had people contacting us being like, I can get you chainsaw chaps and other PPE, where can I send it? And it took me a little time and energy to break away from what I was doing to respond to those messages, but the support that we had coming in, if I hadn't responded to those, or Dan hadn't taken the time to respond to those, we would have lost out on a lot of the stuff, the opportunities we had coming our way. And this also was with people. We had a lot of people messaging us, not just locally in the regions that we were working, but from all across the country, being like, I'm coming in, what can I do? Which also leads to another hard lesson that we learned. You need a way to vet the volunteers if you're doing work like this. Work like this is skilled labor. You need to know what you're doing. If not, you can actually end up sending out an unsafe machine, which is the last thing we want. We had a lot of people messaging us that sounded like they knew what they were doing. They had the experience, they could talk the talk, and then we would get there and we'd watch them work, and it wasn't actually to the level that we needed it for the work that was being done with these machines. So having an idea and a system in mind of a person who's going to be accountable for vetting your volunteers to do this kind of work, and then also being able to have that hard conversation with the volunteer and saying like, hey, we really appreciate you being here, you know, like maybe we can channel their energy into something else, but we don't want them working on the machines. Sending out a chainsaw with a dull chain can be actually dangerous. So having systems in place in mind of what person is taking on what labor, whether it's comms, whether it's vetting volunteers or stuff like that, will save you in the long run. Because it wasn't until like 2 or 3 weeks later that we kind of started thinking about delineation of labor. At the time, we were both just kind of spinning our wheels, trying to do everything we could, and some things fell through the cracks that we wished kind of hadn't. And because of all of this energy coming in, there was a lot of like pressure on our systems. And we had to take our normal traditional repair model and kind of shift it a bit. One of the things was that, again, we usually ask people to stay with the tools they bring us to repair so they can learn. But at this point, we were in survival mode. Everybody was in survival mode. We needed a better system to be able to track things that were coming in, so we didn't lose their tools. Sometimes we would have 80 machines in our care for about an 8-hour window, and we wanted to make sure that every chainsaw went back to the correct person. So we had this system where as they would come in, there was a front of house person, which was me, taking the machines, taking as much information as what's gone wrong with them. And this is where the idea of we're repairing the machines that have been sitting in our community to help our community. We had ones that had been sitting in water, flood water. We had ones that hadn't run in multiple years. We had a chainsaw that came to us that said that it had been made in West Germany. So that was a classic one. And so we're seeing these machines from various, conditions, and the operators only know so much about them. So like one of these, the guy was like, yeah, it caught on fire. This one person said it just won't start. And so I would take as much information as I could, and then I had kind of a queue set up where our repairers could come over, read the tags, see which ones they felt comfortable working on, and take it back to their place, which usually the back of their vehicle, their workstation. And we were trying to create it so that there wasn't a bottleneck where the repairs had to come to me to talk about what was going on. The people didn't have to say this widespread system to try to channel through as many repairs as we could. After they were fixed, which we had between an 86 and 90% success rate with the repairs that we were working on. I would change these tags that we reuse over to a piece of blue tape. So when the person came back, they didn't even have to come up and talk to us. If they didn't want to, they could go find their machine and take it with them. So this system we had to kind of figure out over time, but it's because we had this experience of running repair cafes and specifically experience with small engines that we were able to pivot as quickly as we could, even though we wish we would have pivoted quicker. So what I would recommend for you and your organization, if you want to have some sort of plan in place to do disaster response, is thinking about, one, what sort of disasters your community might face. Will you see flooding? Will you see wind and potentially trees down? Are you in wildfire country where you might have displaced people and be having to set up these community centers? And then also think about the ability of your organization. So where we had small engine experience, we were seeing other organizations work within their abilities, setting up solar power charging plants from a lot of the solar groups in the area. We had people who were setting up low waste shower stations because there wasn't enough potable or non-potable water to be able to shower. We had food trucks coming in that had kind of their off-grid cooking capability, cooking food for centers. So where you may not be able to work on small engines or chainsaws or something like that, what can your organization go ahead and make a couple of plans for, so that, again, goodness forbids any of this happens to any of you all, but you can be able to respond really quickly? Because if you're already an organization operating in your community, you're going to be turned to when something hits because you're already known as a tool library, as a repair group. And again, Dan and I look back and wish that we had been able to do more quicker. I think that's a little bit of like a survivor's guilt type of thing that we're all dealing with now in the region. But taking these lessons, and Dan's going to talk now a little bit about what we learned and the plans moving forward with our mobile trailer.
Yeah, so thank you, Shelby. That was amazing. One thing we really kind of noticed was this, I touched on this yesterday, this rapidly expanded pool of volunteers. Normal times you only have so many people that are willing to volunteer on a regular basis, but when you suddenly have this many people out of work and you have all of this adrenaline in the community, there's a lot more people that are showing up that want to help, to volunteer. So what we want to do is be able to leverage that for the next natural disaster. So if there's another natural disaster in the Southeast, say within like a 300 or 500-mile range of Asheville, we want to take the lessons that we learned and be able to be on site and providing that expertise right then and there in the first few days following a natural disaster. So one thing that we've been able to do with our donation money that came in is build a mobile workshop. This is just a 6x12 trailer with all of the parts and supplies that we need for like a normal day-to-day repair cafe, but then also to double as a disaster response trailer. So a lot of the energy that we're putting into this is thinking about how can we get a small group that's committed to responding to disasters and getting them trained on the specific skill sets that we need. So for us, that was chainsaws and generators, but we also need to be anticipating necessary skills for disasters in a different context. And we need to be recruiting and retaining those volunteers now and begin training those that want to be involved in something like that. We need to be identifying those skills and working on those training sessions now, even if that's something like first aid or if it's sharpening chainsaws or sharpening axes. Let's think in the context of a fire. I can see that we're running out of time. I just want to say, shoot us an email if you want to be part of those conversations. We'd love to keep this going. And thanks a lot.